Welcome back, everyone, to the channel Confessions of the Elderly. Every time I hit my wife, she would go to the altar room and stay there for a long time. One day, out of curiosity, I secretly followed her, and the moment I saw what was before me, I immediately fell to my knees and sobbed. There are mistakes in life that can be forgiven with just an apology. But there are also mistakes where, no matter if you kneel down or cry until you have no tears left, you still cannot erase the wounds you have caused. I once thought I was the most unfortunate man in the world, pushed to a dead end by life. Only many years later, after everything had passed, did I understand that the most pitiful person in that house was never me, but the woman who still quietly called me husband even though I was no longer worthy of that title. My name is Kwan. If someone asked me today what I regret most in this life, I would not need to think before answering. It is the slaps, the punches, and the bitter words I once dealt to my own wife. People always say that a man who hits his wife is a coward. In the past, every time I heard that, I would just scoff. I told myself that anyone who has never been pushed by life should not be quick to judge others. I always found every possible excuse to justify myself. But looking back now, I realize I really was a coward. A coward to the outside world is one thing, but a coward to the very woman who loved me most. My wife's name is Thou. She was so gentle that, at times, it made me furious. Thou didn't know how to argue, how to compete, and certainly didn't know how to hold a grudge. There were days I returned dead drunk, my mouth reeking of alcohol, looking for a fight the moment I stepped into the house. Just because the rice was a little cold, the soup a bit salty, or a pair of slippers was crooked by the door, I could fly into a rage. What puzzled me most over the years was not why Thou endured it, but what she did after every time I hit her. She would do exactly one thing. She wouldn't cry, wouldn't run to the neighbors, wouldn't call anyone to complain, and wouldn't pack her bags to leave like other women. Thou would just quietly go upstairs, open the door to my mother's shrine room, and stay there for a long time. At first, I thought she went up there to cry. Later, I assumed she was complaining about me to my mother. Sometimes, my anger would distort my mind so much that I even thought Thou was standing before my mother's portrait, cursing me. But strangely, each time she came down from the shrine room, she would be as calm as if nothing had ever happened. Her eyes would still be red. Sometimes, the imprint of my hand would still be visible on her cheek. Yet Thou would just quietly head to the kitchen to cook, change the water on the altar, tidy the house, and then go to bed. Never once did she bring up the past, nor did she ever use those wounds to criticize or reproach me. It was that very silence that made me feel so frustrated. Once, I shouted right in my wife's face, "Who are you putting on that face for? Do you want everyone to think I'm a brute?" Quote. Thou just bowed her head and softly replied, "I don't want anyone to think anything." I growled, "Then why do you go to the shrine room every single time?" She was silent for a few seconds, then said very quietly, "Because I feel more at peace in there." Just such a gentle sentence. But back then, I couldn't be bothered to understand. I assumed it was just Thou's way of acting to make me feel guilty. I still believed I was right, and that she was just trying to appear pathetic, until that fateful night. It had been drizzling since the afternoon that day. My work had been at another dead end. Creditors were calling constantly. One call would end, and another would immediately follow. I was too ashamed to face my friends, so I ducked into a familiar tavern. I drank until my head was spinning before dragging myself home. As soon as I opened the door, I saw the yellow kitchen light was still on. Thou was standing there reheating a pot of soup. Hearing the door open, she turned around, her voice as gentle as always. "You're home? Let me reheat dinner for you." It was just a normal sentence, but at that moment, it felt like someone was rubbing salt into my heart. In my head, there was only one thought left. She was pitying me. I hate being looked at with pity the most. When I was a child, my relatives looked at me that way. After going bankrupt as an adult, people looked at me the same. Now, even my own wife looks at me like that. I snarled, "What kind of look is that?" Thou froze, hurriedly replying, I just wanted to ask if you wanted to eat." "I'm not dead yet." "I never said you were dead. I don't need your pity." Quote. With that, I violently swept the meal off the table. The soup bowl shattered, rice scattered across the floor, and the dish of braised fish rolled away at my feet. Thou flinched but didn't make a sound. She just silently stooped to pick up the broken pieces, a sharp shard cutting her finger as drops of red blood fell to the floor. Seeing that, I should have stopped, but irrational anger combined with the alcohol turned me into a different person. I grabbed her shoulders and shouted, "Are you mute?" Thou looked up, her eyes red, but she tried to stay calm. She whispered, "Quan, please calm down." I don't know why, but those 3 words were like adding fuel to the fire. I swung my hand, and a slap echoed through the quiet house. The sound was so loud that even I froze for a few seconds. Thou stumbled backward, one hand clutching her cheek. I stood there stunned. Something inside me stung, but my foolish pride wouldn't let me apologize. I turned away, trying to act cold. "What are you still standing there for?" Thou looked at me for a long time. Her gaze was no longer sad as before, but seemed utterly exhausted. She didn't cry, she didn't blame me. She didn't ask why, just quietly walked past me and climbed the stairs. I knew she was heading to the altar room, just like all the times before. But this time, whether because of the alcohol, curiosity, or a sudden, strange sense of unease, I felt restless. I didn't stay in the living room anymore. I tiptoed to follow her. I made my footsteps as light as possible, almost silent. Reaching the slightly ajar door of the altar room, I peeked through the gap. And at that very moment, what I saw made my legs go weak and my breath catch in my throat. I stood frozen like a statue. Because the woman I had just struck was not kneeling to blame me. She was holding an old wooden box, filled with letters in my mother's familiar handwriting. Thou trembled as she opened each letter, sobbing through her tears. "Mom, I'm sorry, I can't keep my promise to you much longer." Standing outside the room that night, hearing Thou call out to my mother through her choked sobs, many old memories suddenly surfaced in my mind. Things that, because of alcohol, debt, and the pride of a failed man, I had deliberately buried deep down. People often only see a man when he's down on his luck and judge how terrible he has become. But few know that before becoming this cruel, there was a time I loved my wife with all my heart. I met Thou back in the day on a rainy afternoon when I was just a penniless young man delivering goods for a small appliance store in town. That day, my bike got a flat tire on the road, I was late for the delivery, soaked to the bone, with only a few coins left in my pocket. I stood huddled under the eaves of a grocery store, feeling both frustrated and pathetic. Right then, Thou came out, handed me a dry towel, and said, "Wipe your face, you'll catch a cold standing in this rain for so long." I remember her smile clearly back then. It wasn't flashy or pretentious, just gentle like the light in a small kitchen. Thou was a sales clerk back then, her salary not much higher than mine. But she lived kindly with everyone. If anyone was short a few thousand, she would gently tell them to pay next time. Any child passing by, she would give a piece of candy or a banana. I was naturally quiet and carried many insecurities, so at first, I didn't dare to get close to her. I was born into a family with nothing but the 2 of us, my mother and me, relying on each other. My father passed away early. My mother, Mrs. Mann, was a widow who, despite being sickly year-round, worked every job she could to raise me. When I was little, I was often looked down upon by my paternal relatives. Some would come to our house, look at our leaky tin roof, and drop a comment that sounded like a joke. "Quan will probably just end up being a hired hand when he grows up. How could a family like this ever have the luck to get ahead?" That statement followed me for years like a thorn stuck in my heart. I grew up with a constant fear of being disrespected by others. I feared poverty, feared pitying gazes, and feared going to memorials where my mother would sit quietly at the end of the table while others talked about houses, land, and money in a voice meant for us to hear. Once, I pulled my mother's hand to leave early, but she just sighed and said, "Son, being poor is not shameful, living a base life is." I nodded then, but inside, I silently swore that I would definitely get rich one day and make those who looked down on us hang their heads in shame. Thou was the first person who did not look at me with pity. When she learned of my circumstances, she only said, "I'm not afraid of marrying a poor man, I'm only afraid of marrying someone without ambition." A very simple sentence, yet it kept me standing firm during the hardest years of my life. I began to take on more work. I delivered goods during the day, helped in a warehouse at night, and did odd plumbing and electrical jobs on weekends. Thou never complained about anything. After she got off work, She would drop by to help me with the ledger and accounting. Some days, she would even sit behind me on the bike, delivering goods until late at night. The day I brought Thou home to meet my mother, Mrs. Mann looked at her for a long time, her eyes welling up with tears. My mother held Thou's hand, her thin hands trembling as she said, "Marrying my son Quan will be a hard life, dear. He is kind, but he is stubborn and prideful. If he ever makes you sad, just scold him, don't keep it inside." Thou just smiled and gently replied, "I trust him, ma'am. Someone who has loved his mother this much cannot possibly be a bad person." That sentence made me feel as if I were being lifted up that day. I thought that no matter how poor life might be, I would never let Thou have any regrets. After the wedding, we rented a small room at the end of an alley. Summers were sweltering, and during the rainy season, water dripped right onto our bed. Some nights, we had to jump out of bed to catch the leaks, looking at each other and bursting into laughter. While mopping the floor, Thou said, "When we have our own home, I just need a bright kitchen, enough to cook for Mom and you." My mother later came to live with us. She suffered from joint pain, had trouble walking, and often struggled with insomnia. Thou never complained. She woke up early to cook porridge for Mom and took time to call and ask if she'd taken her medicine. In the evening, after work, she would massage my mother's limbs. There were days I came home late to find Thou sitting by Mom's bed, massaging her shoulders and telling her stories from the market. My mother smiled gently, looking at her daughter-in-law even more warmly than at her own son. In those early years, we were poor but truly loved each other. A simple meal of boiled vegetables and a bowl of fish sauce with egg felt delicious. I would come home from work exhausted. Thou would put her hand on my shoulder and ask, "Are you very tired today?" Just that one question made all the hardships out there feel worth enduring. I once believed I was the luckiest man alive to have a mother who loved me and a wife who trusted me to the end. Then, our business began to improve. From small repair jobs, I saved enough to open a household supply store. Thou helped me manage the books. My mother sat in the corner, watching the neighbors' children run back and forth. Even though we didn't have kids yet, the cramped rental house was gradually replaced by a small home bought on installment. The day we moved into the new house, my mother lit the first incense stick. Thou stood beside me, her eyes red with joy. I once held my wife's hand before the ancestral altar and said, "Thou, I promise that no matter what happens, I will never let you suffer." She looked at me and smiled faintly. "I don't need riches. I just need us not to lose each other." If time could have stopped on that day, perhaps my life would have been different. But sometimes, people don't lose to poverty. They lose because when they achieve a little success, they forget what is truly most precious. I didn't realize back then that my desperate desire to change my life was too rushed. It was the obsession with wanting to hold my head high among my relatives that would later push me into making wrong decisions. And from that point on, the man who once loved his wife with all his heart and cared for his mother more than himself began to stray from the path of integrity he had promised to follow for the rest of his life. Looking back, I now understand that some falls in life are not as frightening as how we choose to get back up after them. A person with true character can take their time getting up, as long as they keep their heart honest. But I, back then, after a few successful years and tasting the sweetness of money, mistakenly thought I was better than everyone else. I forgot the days when I had to scrimp on every meal, forgot how Thou's hands helped me save every penny of capital, and also forgot my mother's advice. Whatever you do, don't let greed lead you by the nose. My home supply store was originally just a small space located on a street that wasn't very busy. I sold everything from sockets, wires, faucets, and light bulbs to various small household repair tools. Thanks to being hardworking and honest, my regular customers gradually increased. People trusted me because I didn't sell poor quality goods, nor did I overcharge. Thou sat behind the counter, carefully recording every single expense and income in the ledger. She always reminded me, "It's fine if we move slowly, dear. Just don't borrow beyond our means." But at that time, I no longer liked the sound of moving slowly. All I could think about was expanding, going big, and making a lot of money so that the world would look at my mother and me differently. Every time I returned home for anniversaries and saw relatives who used to look down on me now starting to inquire about my life, I wanted to prove myself even more. I wanted one day for them to be in awe whenever my name was mentioned. It was that very desire to be seen as successful that caused me to make my first wrong decision. I borrowed more money to open a small production workshop behind the town. The initial plan was to make some simple household items myself and distribute them to local stores. It sounded reasonable, but I lacked experience in production management, lacked quality control staff, and trusted the verbal promises of partners far too much. Thou tried to advise me so many times. She laid the books out on the table, pointing to every number and said, "Look closely, if an order is just 1 month late, we won't be able to turn things around." I brushed her off, telling her that women don't know about big business, and if you're always afraid of everything, you'll be stuck in this tiny shop your whole life. As soon as I said that, I saw Thou's eyes dim, but she didn't argue. She just quietly closed the notebook and whispered, "I'm not stopping you from thinking big, I'm just afraid you're gambling our family's future." Yet, I still signed the lease for the workshop, imported machinery, and hired more workers. In the first few months, everything seemed to go smoothly. I went everywhere feeling proud, telling people that I was becoming a manufacturer, no longer just some shopkeeper on the street. My mother didn't understand much about business, but seeing the worry in Thou's eyes, she pulled me into the room and warned me, "Kwan, your wife doesn't talk much, but she truly thinks about our family. Don't make her worry so much." I gave a fake nod just to finish the conversation and then continued to do as I pleased, until the market stalled, and our largest client unexpectedly canceled their order. Inventory piled up in the warehouse, while workshop rent, worker wages, and bank interest payments hit me like waves crashing on the shore. I started to lose sleep. During the day, I still tried to act calm. At night, I sat before a pile of bills with shaking hands. My first bankruptcy didn't come with noise, but it hurt like a knife slowly cutting through. I had to liquidate the machinery at dirt cheap prices to pay the rent and let the workers go. Some looked at me with reproach, while others silently took their last paycheck and left. I remember one old worker best, who patted my shoulder before leaving the workshop. "You're still young, Kwan, there's always another chance, but don't be so rash next time." I nodded, but inside, the humiliation was suffocating. The savings our couple had accumulated were almost completely gone. Thou didn't blame me for a single word. She quietly took her wedding jewelry box and sold the earrings and bracelet her mother gave her on our wedding day to pay off the remaining wages for the workers. When I found out, I exploded in anger. "Who gave you the right to sell them? Doing that is just like saying I'm incompetent." Quote, Thou looked at me, her eyes red, but her voice remained very calm. "I'm not saying you're incompetent. I just don't want people leaving here resentful of our family. Money can be earned back, but once trust is gone, it's very hard to regain." I should have been grateful to her. But Thou's kindness at that moment only made me feel even smaller. I started avoiding my wife's gaze. I feared every time she asked if I was okay, because that question made me feel like a failure who needed to be coddled. Then Tan appeared, an old colleague from my days as an employee, glib, always sharp-dressed, and speaking as if the world were in his hands. He sought me out right when I was looking to restore my honor. Tan claimed he had a huge household goods distribution deal. He said investing for just a few months would double my money. He patted my shoulder, laughing loudly. "You need the guts to do business if you want to get ahead, Kwan. If a man always lets his wife handle the money, how will he ever get ahead?" That statement hit exactly where my pride was wounded. I didn't tell Thou, and I didn't consult with my mother. I secretly mortgaged our house deed to get the capital to invest with Tan. When I put the pen to the paper, my hand hesitated for a few seconds as Thou's words flashed through my mind. "Don't gamble our home," but then I reassured myself. "If I just win this once, I'll pay off all my debts, buy back my wife's jewelry, and get better medical care for my mother." 3 months later, Tan vanished, and his phone number was unreachable. The office he had rented was also closed. Those of us who invested flocked there, only to realize it was all just an empty shell. Not only did I lose the money, but I also put the house we were still paying off in jeopardy. That was my second bankruptcy. And this time, it didn't just hit my wallet, it struck right at my already rotting pride. Creditors started showing up at the house. Some days they stood outside the gate, cursing and pounding on the door. My mother, whose illness had worsened by then, still leaned on her cane to walk out and speak up for her son. She trembled, asking them to give him more time. "If he's wrong, he'll pay, but please don't cause a scene in front of the house." Watching my elderly mother bow to strangers, I felt both pain and shame, but instead of waking up, I sank deeper into bitterness. From then on, I started drinking a lot more. At first, it was just a few glasses to sleep, then it became 1 bottle, then 2. I neglected the shop, neglected my mother, and even neglected Thou. Inside me back then, it felt like a coal was smoldering. I hated Tan for cheating me, hated the relatives who mocked me, hated the creditors pressuring me, and hated how life kept pushing me into a corner. But the person who had to endure those outbursts wasn't Tan, nor my relatives, nor the creditors. The one who had to bear my darkness was thou, the person who had walked through the poorest days with me without ever letting go. Back then, I hadn't laid a hand on my wife, but through my words, my looks, and every time I pushed her hand off my shoulder, I had started hurting her a long time ago. Ever since that second bankruptcy, our house no longer had the laughter it once did. Every morning when I opened my eyes, I didn't think about what to do to fix things, only how to avoid debt collection calls, avoid thou's worried eyes, and even avoid the sound of my mother's dry cough from the small room at the end of the hall. I knew my mother's illness was getting worse. I knew thou was getting thinner by the day. But instead of standing up to be their support, I hid inside the shell of a failed man, becoming increasingly unapproachable and bitter. My mother, after months of worry, had become significantly weaker. Her legs, already aching from arthritis, could now barely support her for long. There were nights when she coughed until her face turned blue. Thou would quickly jump up to help her sit up and rub her back. She'd make warm water and call for a ride to take her to the clinic. Meanwhile, I lay in the next room, hearing and knowing everything, but my head was heavy from alcohol. I just turned over, pulled the blanket over my head, and told myself I'd deal with it tomorrow. The next morning, seeing my mother on the hospital bed with an IV in her arm and thou with dark circles under her eyes from staying up all night, I felt a sting in my heart, but that feeling was fleeting, immediately overshadowed by my own pride. I didn't ask my wife a kind word, just grumpily asked, "Why didn't you wake me up?" Thou looked at me, her voice raspy from exhaustion. "I called, but you were sleeping so soundly. Besides, I was afraid you were tired. That should have made me love my wife more." Yet, I heard it as a reproach instead. I snapped at her, saying that was as good as calling me useless. Thou fell silent. Her silence then was no longer gentle as before, but heavy like a stone. I knew I was wrong, but I refused to admit it. I hated the feeling that every time I saw thou caring for Mom, I felt so small. She never once boasted about her efforts, but her devotion only made my own decadence stand out even more. Outsiders always praised thou for being filial and capable. Meanwhile, I, her own son, only knew how to get drunk, avoid responsibility, and lose my temper. One afternoon, Mom called me into her room. It was humid that day, and the room was filled with the buzzing sound of an electric fan. Mom sat leaning against her pillows, her face much thinner, but her eyes were still bright. She looked at me for a long time and said, "Kwan, losing money isn't what's scary. What's scary is losing your conscience along with it." Quote. I froze inside as if struck, but instead of listening, I let out a bitter laugh. "You think I'm a good-for-nothing too, don't you?" Mom sighed. "I didn't say you're a good-for-nothing. I just fear you are abandoning yourself." I stood up abruptly, voice filled with frustration. "Everyone talks such a good game. Mom says I must get up, thou says I must wake up. But is anyone paying off my debts? Is anyone else being harassed by phone calls for money every day like I am?" Mom looked at me, tears welling up. She didn't scold me, she just whispered, "Yes, there is. Your wife is paying for you with her whole life." That sentence choked me, but I still walked out, slamming the door so hard the frame shook. That night, I went drinking again. I drank as if to drown out all of Mom's words in alcohol. But the more I drank, the clearer those words rang out. Your wife is paying for you with her whole life. I hated that sentence because it was true. In her final days, Mom called thou into her room more often. The two of them would talk for a long time, in voices so low I couldn't hear a thing from outside. Once, I pushed the door open and unexpectedly saw Mom holding thou's hand, her eyes red. Thou quickly wiped her tears, and Mom turned her face away. I asked, "What are you two hiding from me?" Thou replied, "Mom was just giving me instructions for the incense later on." I looked at her suspiciously, but then let it go. Back then, I didn't know. It was during those times that Mom handed thou an old wooden box and letters she had silently written. Mom passed away on a morning at the end of the rainy season. The night before, she was strangely lucid. She called me over, her cold hand clutching mine, her lips moving. "Kwan, don't make thou suffer anymore." I lowered my head, my throat tight, but I still couldn't utter a proper promise. I just replied dismissively, "Rest, Mom, don't think too much." She looked at me for a long time, her eyes so sad that whenever I remember it later, my heart aches as if being crushed. The next morning, Mom left as gently as a fading breath in a house already full of weariness. Thou was the one who cried the most at the funeral. She cried until she fainted, her hands still clutching the edge of the coffin like a child who had lost her own mother. As for me, I stood there in mourning clothes, staring at Mom's portrait with an empty heart. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. I only felt a great void inside me, slowly swallowing everything. After the funeral, the house became even more oppressive. Before, even though Mom was sick, at least there was still someone who made me feel I needed to hold on to some decency. With Mom gone, that final thread snapped. I drank more, sometimes even during the day. The shop opened and closed sporadically, and when creditors came, I would hide. When the phone rang, I turned it off. Thou advised me to find a stable job, at least to have some income to pay off debts gradually. She said very gently, "Juan, we can start over from small things. Please stop drinking. Mom would be heartbroken if she saw you." Hearing Mom's name made me flare up. "Don't you dare bring Mom up to lecture me." Thou froze but still tried to say, "I'm not lecturing you. I'm just afraid you're destroying yourself." I slammed my hand down hard on the table. "You think I'm a loser too, don't you? In your eyes, I'm just a good-for-nothing now. Isn't that right?" Thou shook her head, her eyes brimming with tears. "No, I just want you to be yourself again." But I didn't listen. Anger, alcohol, and humiliation had clouded my head. I stepped forward and slapped her. That was the first time I ever hit Thou. The moment that sound rang out, I sobered up for a few seconds. Thou held her cheek, her eyes wide, not because of the pain, but because she couldn't believe the person before her was me. I couldn't believe it either, but my wretched pride kept me from saying sorry. I turned away and growled, "Don't look at me like that." Thou stood still for a moment, then went up to my mother's altar room. From that day on, the nightmare began to repeat itself. I was wrong, I was drunk, I got angry, and then I hurt my wife. After each time, Thou would quietly go to the altar room and stay there for a long time. And I stayed downstairs, hating myself, yet too cowardly to go up and ask what she said to my mother. I knew I was getting worse every day. I knew I was no longer the man who held his wife's hand and promised to protect her. But I didn't know how to break free. Or rather, I was too weak to pull myself out of the mud I had created. That night, standing outside the altar room watching Thou hold an old wooden box, I realized some things had been right in front of me all along. I was just too blind to see them. The yellow light from the altar cast a glow on my wife's face. One of her cheeks was still red from my slap, her lips trembled slightly, and her fingers were hastily wrapped in a tissue after being cut by a bowl shard earlier. Yet, there was no resentment in those eyes, only pain, exhaustion, and a silent despair that made my heart feel crushed. Thou knelt before my mother's portrait, the wooden box resting on her knees. I recognized that box. My mother used to keep old things in it. A few faded photos, my birth certificate, the silver bracelet I wore as a child, and the letters my father sent home before he passed away. After my mother fell seriously ill, I rarely paid attention to her belongings. I just assumed that box had been tucked away somewhere in a drawer. I never expected it to be in Thou's hands. She opened a yellowed envelope with frayed edges, bearing my mother's shaky handwriting. Those words sent a chill down my spine. To Thou, when Juan loses his way again. I stood outside the door, frozen in place. What does "loses his way again" mean? When did my mother write these letters? And why was Thou the one reading them instead of me? Thou wiped her tears and slowly opened the letter. Her voice was very soft, but in the quiet room, every word rang clearly in my ears. My dear Thou, if one day you have to open this letter, I know for sure that Juan has hurt you deeply. I am sorry, I am his mother. I dare not deny my son's mistakes. But I am also the woman who held him during nights of high fever, and saw him cry after being pushed by friends. I saw him hide behind the door when relatives called him fatherless. I know he carries many wounds, but I also know those wounds cannot be an excuse for him to hurt others. I gripped the door frame tightly, my throat tightening. The things my mother mentioned were things I thought I had forgotten. When I was little, the kids in the neighborhood used to tease me for being fatherless. Once, they hid my sandals, pushed me into a ditch, and laughed out loud. I went home soaked, angry and resentful, but when Mom asked, I only said I slipped. That night, I heard my mother crying behind the thin partition. From that day on, I told myself not to be weak anymore, not to let anyone look down on me again. Thou continued reading, her sobs punctuating every sentence. As he grew older, he learned to harden himself to hide his insecurities. He fears poverty, being looked down upon, and failure. So when he stumbles, he easily turns his own pain into thorns pointed at those closest to him. I am not defending him, my dear. Wrong is still wrong. A man who hurts his wife has no justification. But if one day you still have enough love, I beg you to pull him back. Do not let him destroy his life. Hearing that, tears streamed down my face before I even realized it. For so long, I always thought Mom loved me the most, so if she were still alive, she would surely take my side. I was wrong. Mom loved me, but she was not blind. She understood me completely, even the ugly parts one dared not acknowledge myself. She knew I could fall, she knew I could make thou suffer, and she had to beg her daughter-in-law to save her wayward son. Thou bowed her head over the letter, her shoulders trembling. She stopped reading and hugged the letter to her chest, choking back tears as she spoke to Mom's portrait. Mom, I have tried. I really tried so hard, but I'm so scared. Every time he's drunk, I can no longer recognize the man I used to love. I know he suffers, I know he is in pain, but I'm in pain too, Mom. I am a human being too, Mom. That sentence was like a knife stabbing straight into my heart. That's right, thou is a human being too, a woman of flesh and blood who knows pain, fear, and sorrow. Yet for so long, I treated her like a punching bag to vent my anger, as if her love for me meant she had to endure everything. Thou opened another envelope, on which it was written, "If you can no longer take it." Her hands were visibly shaking. I saw that the box contained more than just letters. Underneath, there was a small notebook, some medical records, and a folded divorce paper. My heart felt like it plummeted into an abyss. It turns out thou didn't lack a way out. She had prepared everything. She only stayed because she kept her promise to my mother, and perhaps because she still held a faint hope that I would come to my senses. Thou opened the second letter, reading it amidst choked sobs. Daughter, if the time has come for you to leave, I will not blame you. I only ask you to remember one thing. Saving someone else does not mean burying yourself alive. If Quan can turn his life around, give him a chance to change, not for you to endure more. But if he continues to cause you pain, please save yourself first. I love you like my own daughter, and I don't want you to ruin your whole life just because of a promise to me. I couldn't take it anymore. My knees went weak, and my whole body collapsed right outside the door. The noise was very faint, but enough for thou to startle and turn around. When she saw me, in that moment, her eyes held no panic, no anger, just a gaze of utter exhaustion. As if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. I pushed the door open to enter but didn't dare to step any closer. I fell to my knees in front of my mother's altar. For the first time in my life, I felt so small, vile, and shameful that I couldn't bear to look up at her photo. I burst into tears. Not the kind of crying from being drunk, losing money, or feeling crushed by life, but the tears of someone who finally sees their sins so clearly they cannot be denied. My voice trembling, I said, Mom, I was wrong, I was truly wrong. Then I turned to thou. That woman was still kneeling there, a handprint on her cheek, clutching my mother's letters as if holding on to the last bit of faith remaining. I bowed my head, my tears falling onto the cold tile floor. Thou, I am sorry, I am not asking for your forgiveness right now. I also dare not say that one apology is enough, but please let me redeem myself before it's too late. If you still want to leave later, I won't hold you back, but please don't think you don't deserve a peaceful life because of me. Thou didn't answer. She just looked at me for a long time, then slowly folded the letters and placed them in the wooden box. That very silence made me understand that things couldn't return to how they were just by my tears. But at least in that moment, before my mother's altar, before my wife who had suffered so much, I knew there was no other way but to start over as a new person. I used to think that as long as a person realizes they are wrong, everything will start to get better. But that's not true. Realizing you are wrong is only the first step. Beyond that moment lies a very long, painful road, because the wounds you cause others don't just disappear because you know how to cry. That night, after I knelt before my mother's altar, the room was suffocatingly silent. Thou was still sitting there, hugging the wooden box to her chest. Her eyes no longer held the fear she showed when she first saw me at the door, but they also lacked the softness I was used to. I understood that her last shred of patience had run out. I looked up at my wife, my voice still trembling. Thou, I know I have no right to say anything, but please don't go. I will change. I swear that from tomorrow, I'll quit drinking, find a job, pay off my debts, and I will never lay a hand on you again. Thou stared at me for a long time. She didn't cry anymore, just wiped the tear streaks from her cheeks. That very calmness frightened me more than when she used to scream. When a woman still cries and yells, it means she still wants to be heard, to be comforted. But thou had then crossed a distant boundary, where my pleas were no longer enough to pull her back. She spoke softly, Quan, I'm tired. Just those 4 words felt like a door slamming shut in my face. I shook my head, rushing to get closer. I know you're tired, I know I'm awful, but can you give me one more chance? For Mom's sake, for the years we once loved each other. Thou placed the wooden box on the altar and slowly stood up. She walked to the small cabinet in the corner, opened the drawer, and took out a brown fabric bag. I went numb seeing it already packed with folded clothes, ID papers, medical records, and the divorce papers I had seen earlier. It turned out thou hadn't just thought of leaving tonight. She had prepared long ago. I was just too blind to notice. I reached out to block the door, my voice hoarse, Are you really leaving? Thou did not avoid my gaze. She replied very softly, but every word was clear. I am leaving not to punish you, but to protect myself. If I stay, one day either you will beat me until I can't stand, or I will wither away and die in this house. My heart tightened as I heard her. I wanted to say that's not true, to say I would never let it happen again, but the words stuck in my throat, because even I couldn't trust myself anymore. How many times, sobered up, did I promise myself I wouldn't relapse? How many times, seeing the bruises on my wife's arms, did I despise myself? Yet, here I am, back to square one. I knelt down and took her hands. Thou, please, I don't have anyone else. Mom is gone. If you leave too, how am I supposed to live? Thou pulled her hand away, not forcefully, but firmly. She looked up at my mother's portrait and said, Don't kneel to me, kneel to your mother. She is the person you've wronged the most. Even though she's gone, you still make her watch her son turn into someone like this every single day. That statement made me hang my head in shame. On the altar, my mother's portrait looked as kind as ever, but in that moment, I dared not look at it directly. I felt that I had not only failed thou but also betrayed everything my mother endured her whole life to raise me. Right at that moment, my phone in the living room suddenly rang continuously. The ringing in the middle of the night sounded chillingly piercing. I stumbled to my feet to go answer it. On the screen was the number of a creditor. As soon as I picked up, the voice on the other end shouted, quote, Quan, this is the last time I'm saying this. If there's no money tomorrow morning, we're coming to clear the place out. Don't think hiding inside the house will save you. I was speechless. Thou was standing on the stairs. She must have heard everything. In the past, she probably would have rushed to ask how much was owed and started rummaging for things to sell. But this time, she just watched me silently. I hung up and tried to speak as if joking. You saw that, didn't you? If you leave now, I really can't handle this. Thou walked down a few steps, her voice calm but colder than usual. Your debts are yours to resolve on your own. I've been your shield for far too long. I stood there, paralyzed. She wasn't wrong, but it hurt because for the first time, thou was no longer automatically stepping between me and the consequences. She was no longer using herself to cover up my mistakes. That night, thou left the house. She took nothing with her except for a small bag and a few letters my mother let her keep. Before stepping through the door, she turned to look at me one last time. I'll stay with Han for a while. Don't come looking for me. When you're truly sober, we'll talk. I wanted to rush after her and hold her back, but my feet felt nailed to the floor. The door clicked shut, and the sound of the vehicle in the alley faded away. The house was left with only me, the smell of spilled rice in the kitchen, dried blood on the tiles, and Mother's cold altar upstairs. I went back to the prayer room and opened another letter from the wooden box. On the envelope, Mother had written, "When thou left the house." My hands trembled as I opened it. There were only a few brief lines. "Kwan, if you are reading this letter after thou has left, it means you have lost the most precious thing in your life. Do not chase after her to beg with empty words. Stand up and make amends through your actions. Otherwise, you won't just lose your wife, but the last shred of humanity I tried to save for you." I clutched the letter and sat on the floor of the prayer room until nearly dawn. The alcohol's hold faded, replaced by a terrible tremor. I searched for every bottle in the house and smashed them one by one in the backyard. The strong scent of alcohol rose up and made me nauseous. But only a few hours later, my hands began to shake, my head throbbed, and my throat felt parched. I craved a drink to the point of insanity. I locked myself in the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, shaking and muttering, "Don't drink anymore. Don't." The next morning, as I sat on the floor, exhausted from a sleepless night, someone suddenly pounded on the gate. It was my aunt, Aunt Fuang, calling out shrilly, "Kwan, open the door. Big trouble has happened in this house, and you're still hiding?" I braced myself to stand and staggered to open the gate. Stepping inside, Aunt Fuang looked around the house, then glanced at my mother's altar, pretending to sob. "Oh, man, you've barely been laid to rest and your daughter-in-law has already run off with the money." I was stunned. "What money?" Aunt Fuang snapped her head toward me, her gaze cold and sharp. "Are you still defending her? The family donation safe for your mother is completely empty, that thou left right in the middle of the night. If she didn't take it, then who did?" Aunt Fuang's words landed in the yard like a bucket of cold water. I stood frozen, my head still throbbing after a night of struggling with withdrawal, my limbs weak, my throat parched. If it were the me of a few days ago, just hearing that thou took it would have made my temper explode. I probably would have called my wife to scold her, forced her to return to explain, or even believed an outsider to heap more blame on a woman who had suffered so much injustice for my sake. But in that moment, for some reason, the words my mother wrote in the letter echoed in my mind. "Don't chase after her to beg with empty words. Stand up and make amends with your actions." I looked at Aunt Fuang and asked, word by word, "Which money are you talking about?" Aunt Fuang is my mother's younger sister. Back when Mom was poor, she rarely stepped foot in our house. At death anniversaries, she'd eat a quick meal and leave. When Mom was bedridden, she only called to ask after her in passing. Yet, ever since hearing this house had its own deed, she started visiting often, always claiming how much she missed her sister and loved her nephew. But her eyes would keep darting around to see what was worth anything in the house. I knew her nature, but out of respect for my mother, I never spoke directly. Today she didn't come alone. Following her was Tuit, her son, my cousin a few years younger than me, always looking arrogant, holding his phone as if just waiting for something to film. As soon as he stepped in, he raised his phone, pretending to casually pan across the house, from the living room to my mother's altar. I frowned. "Tuit, what are you filming?" He smirked. "I'm just filming to make things clear, brother. Financial matters in the house need to be transparent. What if someone denies it later?" Before I could answer, Aunt Fuang walked straight to the altar, crying as she went. But those cries sounded so fake that I felt a chill down my spine. She stood before my mother's portrait, beating her chest. "Sister man, you've barely been gone, and already your daughter-in-law has shown her true colors. She took the money and left in the night, leaving your son barely half alive like this." I clenched my fists and growled, "Don't you dare speak nonsense in front of my mother's altar." Aunt Fuang spun around, her eyes widening in anger. "Nonsense, you're still blinded and defending her. The money our relatives donated for your mother's medical treatment was in the safe. I checked it this morning, and it was completely empty. She ran off last night. If she didn't take it, then who did?" I furrowed my brow. "From the time my mother fell ill until she passed away, thou kept records of almost every medical expense. Who gave how much, what it was used for, how much was left. She kept a separate ledger for it all. I never paid any attention, and I certainly don't recall any fund called donations from relatives. Besides, if there really was money, why would Aunt Fuang know more about it than I do?" Tuit shoved his phone into my face. "Kwan, say something. Did thou leave last night or not? Did the money disappear after she left?" His questions sounded like inquiries, but they were already loaded with his own conclusions. I looked at the glowing phone screen, seeing my own gaunt face, red-rimmed eyes, looking exactly like a man betrayed by his wife. For a few seconds, a dark thought flickered through my mind. What if thou really did take it? She had prepared the papers, prepared the divorce petition, and left in the dead of night, while I was drowning in debt. What if she wanted to save herself and took the money to start a new life? But instantly, the image of thou kneeling before my mother's altar flashed in my mind, her reddened cheek, the hand she hid from me, her fingers bleeding from picking up broken bowl shards. Her voice had choked up as she spoke to my mother. I'm a human being too, Mom. Someone like that, if she had wanted to steal money and run, she would have had plenty of chances over the years. She didn't need to wait until the night I hit her to do something like that. I took a deep breath and snatched the phone from Tuit's hand. If anyone says my wife took the money, show me proof. Don't stand in front of my mother's altar and make things up. Aunt Phuong froze. Perhaps she didn't expect me to stand up for thou. Her face immediately darkened. She's put a spell on you, Quan. She abandoned the house in the middle of the night, yet you still defend her. A woman who is too submissive is usually one with a hidden agenda, my boy. She only put up with you all this time to wait until your mother died, so she could snatch a pile of cash and leave. My blood boiled when I heard that. But this time I didn't yell like I usually do. I just looked her straight in the eye. Aunt Phuong, when my mother was in the hospital, how much did you contribute? I'm asking seriously, so I know which amount you're referring to. She faltered for a second, but then immediately raised her voice. Well now, are you interrogating your aunt? Money is about kindness. Who keeps track of every single cent? I gave a cold laugh. Thou kept track of every single cent. That made Tuit glance at his mother. It was just a quick look, but it was enough for me to sense something was wrong. Tuit quickly chimed in. Don't try to change the subject. The issue is that thou ran away. If she were innocent, why didn't she stay and explain? I replied, because I hit her. Because she had to protect herself. Is that reason enough? Both Aunt Phuong and Tuit went silent for a few seconds. Neighbors heard the noise and started peeking at the gate. Seeing people watching, Tuit intentionally spoke louder. Quan, you were drunk, so you've been led by the nose by her. She took the money and fled, and now you're taking the blame for her. People are going to laugh at you. I stepped forward, my voice dropping. How I've wronged my wife is my own business, but whoever accuses her of stealing must prove it. If you can't, it's slander. Tuit sneered, but I saw his hand trembling slightly. He stopped arguing, backed out to the yard, and muttered while tapping on his phone, we'll see who everyone believes. By noon that day, I finally understood what that meant. A heavily edited video clip was released into the neighborhood group chat. The clip only showed Aunt Phuong crying before my mother's altar, the empty safe, and me standing there looking lost and heartbroken. Tuit even added a caption. Daughter-in-law flees the very night her mother-in-law passes away, taking the medical money. The family was too heartbroken to find the words. My phone exploded with calls from acquaintances asking questions. Neighbors sent messages probing for details. Some even said, it's hard to trust a wife who acts too gentle, Quan. I looked at those words, feeling both furious and ashamed. But the most shameful thing is that, in the past, I was the one who gave others a reason to suspect thou. I treated her so poorly that now, when people hear she left, they all think it makes sense. I rushed to Han's house, the close friend thou said she would stay with. As soon as she saw me, Han blocked me right at the gate. She is a woman in her 40s, living alone, and as blunt as they come. She looked me up and down and said coldly, why are you still here? Are you here to drag thou back to take the blame for you again? Quote, I bowed my head, I just want to see thou. People are framing her for stealing money, I need her to speak up. Han gave a faint, mocking smile. Oh, so when you were beating your wife, you didn't need her to speak up? Now that your reputation is at stake, you need her to step forward. I was speechless as she opened her phone and showed me one photo after another. Thou's bruised wrists, bloodied shoulders, swollen cheeks, some even taken at the clinic. The dates were clear, and I felt a bitter taste in my throat looking at them. Han said slowly, there were times thou was in so much pain she had to ask me to take her to the doctor. She still told me not to tell anyone, because she said you were suffering. Did you hear that clearly? The victim is still worried that the person who hurt her is suffering. I stood frozen, my eyes stinging. Han lowered her voice, but every word felt like a nail driven into my chest. If you want to be a decent person, first stop forcing the victim to come back and save face for the one who caused her pain. If you truly have a shred of conscience left, stand up and protect her yourself. Not with tears, but with actions. I left Han's house as the afternoon faded into evening. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be cornered, not by others, but by my own mistakes. Behind me is the wife I falsely accused. Before me are relatives setting traps. And in my heart, one question keeps echoing. If I stay silent this time, am I still worthy of being called my mother's son? Returning from Han's house, I sat for a long time in the empty living room. On my phone screen, Tuit's clip continued to be shared and passed around. Every time a new message pops up, my heart tightens. People don't care about the full truth, they just need a story bitter enough to gossip about. And what hurts the most? Thou is once again being cast as the villain for my own mistakes. I look around the house. This place used to have my mother's coughing, thou cooking, my nagging, the sound of breaking dishes. Now there is only silence. I remember Han's words. Don't force a victim to return to save the face of the one who hurt her. Those words beat in my head with every rhythm. Right, if I still want to be a decent person, the first thing isn't to beg thou to return, but to step up and tell the truth. I set my phone on the bookshelf and turn on video mode. When I see my face on the screen, I almost don't recognize it. Hollow eyes, ragged stubble, chapped lips, a pathetic appearance. But this time, I won't look away. I take a deep breath and press record. I am Nguyen Din Quan. I'm making this video to clarify something. My wife, thou, did not take a single penny from my mother or my family. She left home because I hit her. I am a guilty husband, a man who drinks, loses control, and hurts his wife. Whoever wants to curse, curse me. Do not make up stories to blame her. Saying that, my throat chokes up. A part of me is still afraid. Afraid of being looked down upon, afraid of relatives mocking me, afraid of creditors knowing just how pathetic I've become. But then I remember the photos Han showed me, remember the look in thou's eyes while clutching my mother's wooden box. I continue, I have been drunk a lot, but from today on, if anyone spreads rumors that my wife stole, I will personally step up to clear it all to the end. She has suffered enough. I send the video to the family group, the neighborhood group, and post it to the personal page I've left dormant for years. Once my finger hits the send button, I feel my heart pounding wildly. It isn't a feeling of complete relief, but rather like I've just torn away my final mask with my own hands. I know that after that video, some will pity me, some will call me a coward, and some will mock a man for dragging his own name through the mud. But at least for the first time, I didn't use thou as a shield anymore. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Aunt Phuong. As soon as I picked up, her voice shrieked in my ear. Have you gone insane, Quan? Are you admitting to hitting your wife just so the world can laugh at our whole family? I replied very calmly. I'll own what I've done, but I won't let you and Tuit Vu get away with letting thou take that money. Aunt Phuong lowered her voice, but it sounded even more venomous than when she was shouting. You're such a fool, child. She's already left you, yet you still defend her. This house will fall into the hands of an outsider sooner or later anyway. The word outsider made me pause. All this time, Aunt Phuong has always called thou an outsider. Even though thou was the one who cared for my mother through every dose of medicine and every painful night, today that word sounded different. It wasn't just disdain. It sounded like the fear of losing something she thought rightfully belonged to her. Before I could think any further, a car pulled up in front of the gate. A man stepped out, and his walk, his smile, and the way he adjusted his collar made my blood run cold. It was Tan. He had vanished for months after running off with my money and the money of many others. Yet here he was, standing at my gate, dressed sharply with shiny shoes, carrying a bag of fruit as if he were just visiting an old friend. He looked at me and let out a fake sigh. Quan, I was so shocked to hear about your situation. I know you're suffering, so I came to see you. I clenched my fists. If it were before, I probably would have lunged at him. But I remembered I had just promised before my mother's altar that I wouldn't let anger control me anymore. I stepped aside to let him in. My voice cold, I asked, you still dare to come here? Tan set the fruit bag on the table and sighed. About the past, I had my own troubles, but now is not the time to blame each other. I have a way to help you get through this. I looked at him. What way? He pulled up a chair and sat down, speaking quickly as if he had it all prepared. Sell the house. Keeping this place is only going to weigh you down further. My wife left, debts are piling up, and my relatives are making a scene. I've got a buyer offering a good price, ready to put down a deposit tonight. Once you sell, You can pay off your debts and have some capital left to start over. I stayed silent. He thought I was wavering, so he continued, your mom is gone. What's the point of keeping this house and feeling heartbroken? What matters for a man is to get back on his feet. Sign the power of attorney for me, and I'll handle all the paperwork. You just need to take the money. Every word of his would have sounded perfectly reasonable to me a few days ago. A drunk, drowning in debt, abandoned by his wife, pressured by relatives. Anyone in that spot would jump at the chance for money. But at that moment, a chilling sensation suddenly washed over me. Why did Tan appear right after Tuat released that clip? Why did An Phuong just say this house would fall into the hands of an outsider? Tan brought a buyer, but why is he so desperate for me to sell my house? I looked up at Mom's portrait, and a phrase she once said echoed in my mind. When you're at a dead end, the person reaching out to you isn't necessarily your savior. I suddenly felt strangely clear-headed. I turned to Tan, trying to look weary, and asked, how much would it sell for? His eyes lit up for a fleeting second. He said selling in a rush won't fetch market value, but because he cares, he pushed for a decent offer, stressing that time is critical because if creditors arrive in a few days, I won't be able to keep the house anyway. I nodded, pretending to sigh. Let me think about it. Bring the proper paperwork tomorrow, and I'll sign if it looks okay. Quote. Tan patted my shoulder, grinning as if he had already won. That's a real man. Don't let women make you soft anymore. I choked down my disgust, waited for him to leave, then locked the gate and went back inside. For some reason, my footsteps led me straight to my mother's room. I rarely entered that room after Mom passed away, because every time I opened the door, the scent of medicated oil, old medicine, and her bedding makes it hard for me to breathe. I opened every drawer, searching aimlessly. In the very last drawer, under a stack of old handkerchiefs, I found a folded piece of paper. My mother's handwriting appeared, shaky but clear. Tan and Tuat had come here asking for the land title. I must be careful. These two are not simple. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, the paper in my hand sending chills down my spine. So, Mother had known all along. It turns out that even while severely ill, she had silently seen the shadows lurking around this house. And I, her only son, was so blind that I almost signed away the last place she left behind. I folded the paper, held it to my chest, and tears welled up. But this time I wasn't crying out of weakness. I was crying out of anger at Tan, Tuat, An Phuong, and myself for letting them use me as a knife to stab thou. I looked up at Mother's altar and whispered, rest assured, Mother, this time I won't let them lead me by the nose anymore. After finding the note Mother left, I couldn't sleep a wink. Mother's room still smelled of medicated oil and old medicine. The pillow she used to lie on was still slightly indented in the middle. The thin blanket was neatly folded by thou at the foot of the bed. I stood in that room, holding the paper with Tan and Tuat's names, feeling my heart grow cold bit by bit. It turns out Mother had long seen things I couldn't see. She was so weak she could barely walk, yet she still silently protected this house, protecting both me and thou from people disguised as friends. I continued searching the old cabinet, not out of greed, but because I had a feeling Mother hadn't just left behind one note. Knowing Mother's nature, if she suspected someone, she would surely have a way to keep evidence. Underneath some old handkerchiefs, I found a piece of tape stuck to the bottom of the drawer. I carefully peeled it off, and a small memory card fell into my palm. My heart pounded. Along with the memory card was a folded piece of paper. On it, Mother had written in a trembling hand, if this house faces turmoil after I'm gone, open this before trusting anyone. My hands trembled as I held the memory card. Outside, it had just grown dark, and inside, only the ticking of the wall clock remained. I brought Mother's old computer to the desk and inserted the memory card. The screen displayed many folders named by dates. I opened the first clip. The image was slightly blurry but clear enough to recognize my living room. It was back when my mother was still alive. Sitting on the wicker chair by the window, An Phuong and Tuat walked in. Their expressions were completely different from when they were weeping at the altar. An Phuong placed a stack of papers on the table, her voice syrupy sweet, man, just sign here. This is just to confirm that the relatives have contributed money for your treatment. Later, when Quan comes to his senses, he'll be grateful to everyone. Quote, my mother sat up straight. Though her breath was weak, her eyes were very alert. She pushed the stack of papers back. I may be poor, but I'm not stupid. Who gave how much? Thou has recorded it all. No one contributed so much that I need to sign a debt note. Quote, Tuit sneered at that, saying, and, that's not right of you to say. Later, when it comes to the house and land, it won't be fair to the relatives without documentation. Quote, Mother looked him straight in the eye and said slowly, if relatives come together out of affection, there's no need for debt notes, and if they come because of the house, then don't call it affection. I sat before the screen, and a chill ran down my spine. The mother I always thought was gentle and long-suffering. Turns out, in her final moments, she was still more clear-headed than the sun drowning in alcohol. She knew Aunt Phuong and Tuit were insincere. She knew they were just waiting for an opportunity. I opened the second clip, this time showing the backyard, the screen recording Tan standing next to Tuit. Both of them thought there was no one in the house. Tan lit a cigarette, his voice very clear. Quan is ruined. We just need to make him suspect thou a little more, and he'll sign to sell the house himself. Tuit laughed. Her mother is still alive, so it's difficult. She's very sharp, but she's bedridden now. She doesn't have many days left. Wait for her to pass away, then we make our move. Thou is very gentle. Whatever you accuse her of, she just cries. And once Quan is drunk, he doesn't need anyone to egg him on. Quote, I heard that and my blood boiled. I slammed my hand on the table, and the screen shook. It wasn't just anger at Tan, I was furious at myself. Turns out I had been seen through like a clown. They knew my weaknesses were alcohol, my ego, and my suspicion. They knew that with just a few words, I would turn and hurt the woman beside me myself. I clenched my teeth and continued to open the final segment. It was no longer hidden footage. It was my mother sitting before the altar. Looking straight into the lens, she must have set the camera herself to record this message. Her face was much thinner, her eyes deep set, yet her voice remained steady. Quan, if you are watching this, I am likely no longer here. I don't know what happened to our family then, but I suspect someone took advantage of your weakness to manipulate you. I know you are in pain from failure, and from being looked down upon by others, but my son, pain does not give you the right to make thou suffer. She owes you nothing, and she certainly owes our family nothing. I burst into tears the moment I heard that. On the screen, Mother coughed a long, dry cough and continued, Tan is not a good friend. Tuit and Ms. Phuong didn't come because they cared for me either. I saw them asking for the title deed, for the house papers, and even if thou's name was on anything. You must wake up. This house is not as important as your conscience, but if you lose the house out of stupidity, you will drag thou's entire life into the mud. Mother paused, wiped the corners of her eyes, and said the words that made me collapse onto the table. If you still love me, don't let thou take the blame for you ever again. She has suffered enough. I beg you, this time, be a proper husband to her, even if it's for the very last time. I don't know how long I cried. Her words were like lashes of a whip against my back, painful, but they brought me to my senses. I hurriedly copied all the data to my phone, to an old USB drive, and sent another copy to my private email. I feared that if I were a moment too slow, Tan or Tuit would find a way to destroy everything. Afterward, I sat for a long time staring at my phone, looking at thou's name in my contact list. I knew I had no right to disturb her, but this concerned her honor and the trap that others were setting. In the end, I called Sister Han first. She picked up with a guarded tone. What is it now? I spoke quickly. Han, I found evidence. My mother left it on the camera. Tan, Tuit, and Ms. Phuong conspired to frame thou to force me to sell the house. I am not asking for thou back. I just asked to meet her once to show her the evidence. There was silence on the line for quite a while. Then I heard Han whispering to someone. A moment later, thou's voice sounded distant but calm. Quote, Quan, what do you want to see me for? I choked up. Just hearing her voice made my heart ache. I replied, I'm not asking you to save me. I just want to give you something that can protect you. This time I will take a stand myself, but you need to know the truth. Thou was silent for a few seconds, then said, Fine, meet me tomorrow at the cafe near Han's house, but remember, I'm not meeting you to get back together. I'm meeting you to see what you've done besides cry. Her words were sharp as a knife, but I didn't blame her. I just replied, I understand. The next morning, I arrived almost half an hour early. The small cafe sat under an old tree, with faded plastic tables and chairs. Nothing special. But to me, it felt like the first trial I had to walk into on my own. When thou appeared, she was wearing a simple long-sleeved shirt with her hair tied back. Her face was thinner, but her eyes looked steadier than before. I placed the USB drive and copies of the recordings on the table and pushed them toward her. Quote, "This is what Mother left behind. It contains proof that they fabricated stories to hurt you." Thou didn't pick them up right away. She looked at me and asked, "When did you start believing me? Was it when you saw the evidence, or before that?" That question made me bow my head. I answered honestly, "Last night, before I saw the evidence, I already wanted to believe you, but I'm ashamed that it took losing you for me to finally learn how to trust my wife." Thou picked up the USB. Her eyes were red, but she didn't cry. I looked at her, my voice raspy. "This time I'm not asking you to save me. I'm asking you to let me stand up and protect you, even if it's late." Thou turned to look out at the street for a long time before saying, "Better late than never, right? But remember, protecting me this time doesn't erase the times you hurt me." I nodded. "I know, and because I know, I understand even more that the real battle has only just begun." After the meeting at the cafe, Thou and I didn't say much more to each other. She took the USB to review a few clips on Han's phone, then remained silent for a very long time. I knew that deep down, she felt not only relief from being vindicated but also another kind of pain. Pain because her late mother-in-law still had to quietly look out for her. Pain because the husband who should have protected her only started to wake up when everything was nearly shattered. Thou returned the USB drive to me. Quote, her voice was calm. "This matter must be cleared up. Not for revenge, but so that no one will ever use my name or my mother's honor to fabricate stories again." I nodded. Han, sitting next to me, immediately said, "If you want to clear this up, you have to make them say it themselves. If you just show the video now, they'll claim it's edited. You have to make them think Quan is still as foolish as before." I understood what she meant. A trap had been set. But this time, it was not to harm anyone innocent. This time, we would simply let the greedy people step into the very pit they had dug themselves. Thou did not intend to return home, but she agreed to appear when necessary. Before leaving the cafe, she looked at me and said, "Remember, this time you must not lose control. If you hit Tan or Tuit, everything will become your fault." I replied, "I know. This time I will use evidence. Not fists." That sentence sounded simple, but for me, it was a painful reminder. Because my whole life, whenever I felt helpless, I got angry. Whenever I was pressured, I wanted to smash things. Whenever my pride was wounded, I took it out on those weaker than me. If I continued to let anger guide me, I would never escape my old self. That evening, I called Tan, trying to make my voice sound tired and dejected like someone who had given up. Quote, "Bring the papers over tomorrow, I'm selling the house." The other end of the line was silent for a few seconds, then Tan laughed. "That's right, I told you. A man must know how to be decisive. Why keep an empty house with a wife who's walked out?" I swallowed my anger and simply replied, "But I wanted to be clear. With Ms. Fuang there, and Tuit, and a few witnesses, I don't want anyone saying later that I sold it behind their backs." Tan agreed very quickly, so quickly that it confirmed he had been waiting for this moment all along. After that, I messaged Aunt Fuang, telling her to come over tomorrow night, and if she wanted to talk about Mother's medical expenses, she should come to witness it. Less than a minute later, she replied, saying I was finally thinking straight. Don't let outsiders swallow it all. I sat staring at that message, my hands ice cold. The outsider she mentioned was Thou, the one who bathed, changed, and spoon-fed my mother during her final days. Meanwhile, those who call themselves blood relatives only waited for Mother to close her eyes so they could fight over the house. The next evening, the house was more crowded than I had expected. Aunt Fuang dragged Tuit along, plus two distant relatives I rarely see. Tan arrived last, carrying a briefcase, looking as confident as someone about to hit the jackpot. Besides them, a few creditors who heard rumors about me selling the house also showed up, standing in the yard looking impatient. Some curious neighbors peeked from the gate. I didn't turn anyone away. The more witnesses, the harder it is to distort the truth. Aunt Fuang walked in, looked around, and said loudly, "It's such a waste to let a woman who ran away wreak havoc on a house like this. Quan? Selling it is fine, just don't let that Thou touch a single cent." I didn't answer, just gestured for everyone to sit. Tuit was still holding his phone, but this time he tried to be more discreet. I looked straight at him and said, "If you want to record, do it properly. Don't chop off the beginning and end like last time." Tuit's face flickered, while Tan placed the briefcase on the table and pulled out a stack of documents. He spoke fluently, "This is the power of attorney, and this is the deposit agreement. The buyer is very eager. They saw your situation and agreed quickly. Sign it, and you'll get the deposit money tonight. I held a stack of papers, pretending to read through them cursorily. In reality, I had already turned on the recording device in my pocket, and the computer in the living room was connected to the TV, just waiting for the right moment. I asked, if I sign, my debts are considered settled, right? Tan patted my shoulder, with a nauseating sense of intimacy. We're brothers, I wouldn't let you die. Just trust me like you did in the old days. I looked up at him. It's precisely because I trusted you like in the old days that I ended up in this state. The atmosphere came to a standstill. Tan looked a bit awkward but still kept smiling. Don't say such heartless things when times are tough. Just sign it, don't overthink it. Aunt Fuang, standing nearby, also urged me on. Sign it, Quan. Wait any longer and thou will come back to demand her share. Just then, footsteps echoed outside, and thou walked in with Tri Han. The room fell silent instantly. Thou wore simple clothes, her face pale, but her gaze was steady. She didn't look at me first, but looked straight at my mother's altar, bowing slightly to greet her. Aunt Fuang reacted first, pointing a finger at thou and shrieking, "You thief, how dare you show your face here?" I jumped up and stepped in front of thou. For the first time in my life, I did what I should have done a long time ago. I said every word clearly. Anyone who wants to scold her must go through me first. Tuat sneered, quite the performance, Quan. Just the other day your wife left you, and today you're playing the hero saving a damsel. I didn't argue. I picked up the remote and pressed a button. The TV screen lit up. The first video appeared, showing Aunt Fuang and Tuat forcing my mother to sign a debt acknowledgement. My mother's voice rang out clearly. I may be poor, but I'm not stupid. The whole room went dead silent. Aunt Fuang turned pale. This is edited. I pressed the button again. The second clip showed Tan standing with Tuat in the backyard. Tan's voice was crystal clear. Quan is already a wreck. If we make him doubt thou a little more, he'll sign the house sale himself. Tuat in the video laughed. Thou is so soft. Whatever we blame her for, she just cries. No one could say a word. The creditors looked at Tan with a completely different expression. Tan jumped up, intending to rush over and turn off the TV, but a creditor blocked his path. Stay put, you have a lot of things to explain to us. Thou finally stepped forward, looking at Aunt Fuang. Then at Tuat, and finally at Tan. Her voice was not loud but was clear. You may think I'm soft, but don't think being soft means I don't know how to defend myself. I stayed silent not because I was wrong. I stayed silent because I wanted to save some face for this family. I pulled all of thou's medical examination reports out of the drawer. Copies of the clip Tuat posted to the neighborhood group, the smear messages, and the USB drive with the original data. I set them all down on the table. I will hand these over to the authorities to handle. Whoever slandered thou, committed fraud, or forged documents will have to answer for their actions. Tuat backed away, his face drained of all color. Aunt Fuang collapsed onto the chair, her mouth still stammering. I am your own aunt, Quan. How could you do this to me? I looked at her, my heart aching but no longer soft. Precisely because you are my aunt, I hope you won't use our blood ties to commit such immoral acts. Then I turned toward my mother's altar and knelt down in front of everyone. I bowed my head and said, Mother, today is the first time I've done something like a decent human being. Thou did not help me up. She just quietly placed Mother's jewelry box on the table, her voice very soft but clear enough for me to hear. You're just getting started. Quan, don't think that doing the right thing once can erase all the times you were wrong. Thou's words made me keep my head bowed for a long time. That's right, I've only just begun. Standing up for her once cannot wash away all the days I caused her pain. Daring to tell the truth once cannot turn me into a good husband overnight. But at least, in this house that has witnessed so much of my cowardly silence, for the first time, I did not leave thou to stand alone. The living room was completely silent. On the TV screen, the video had paused on the image of Tan and Tuat standing in the backyard. Tan's face was deathly pale, while Tuat looked around furtively as if searching for an escape. Aunt Fuang collapsed back into her chair, one hand clutching her chest, still muttering, It's not like that, this is a misunderstanding, just a misunderstanding. Tan was the first to regain his composure. He adjusted his collar and tried to force a twisted smile. Quan, you're a grown man. Are you really trying to accuse me with these blurry videos? Technology is everywhere now. A little editing and you can change the whole story. Don't let a woman's words turn you against your own kin. Hearing him mention the word woman, I felt my hands clench, but I did not lunge at him. I simply opened the desk drawer, took out a prepared stack of papers, and placed them in front of everyone. These are the bank statements of the money I transferred to you. This is the loan agreement I signed after you convinced me to invest. These are the messages where you promised to pay me back in 3 months. And this is a list of others who also sent you money, which they sent to me after watching the video. A creditor standing in the yard immediately stepped in and snatched the papers to read. He was someone who had come to my house many times to demand money, always with a harsh tone, but his expression changed completely upon seeing Tan's name in the documents. He turned to Tan, gritting his teeth. "So you're also involved in this? I thought the money Quan borrowed was just his own business loss. I never expected you were the one collecting it." Tan took a step back, still trying to argue. Don't listen to his side of the story. Business has its ups and downs. He lost money and now he's blaming me. Tuit, seeing Tan cornered, immediately reached stealthily into his pocket. I caught a glimpse of his phone screen lighting up. Perhaps he was planning to delete the clip defaming Thou in the neighborhood group or remove related messages. But Han was faster. She stepped forward, pointed her phone directly at Tuit's hand, her voice sharp as a blade. "Go ahead, keep deleting. I've already recorded everything clearly. An innocent person wouldn't rush to destroy evidence the moment they're questioned." Tuit froze, his face turning bright red. He snapped, "Who are you to meddle in other people's family business?" Han laughed coldly. "I am the one who took Thou to the doctor when she was beaten. I am the one who kept photos of her injuries. And today, I am the witness to you trying to destroy evidence of slandering an innocent woman." Quote, Thou stood beside them in silence. She didn't gloat, didn't curse, and didn't fight with anyone for the last word. That calmness only made me ache more. I used to mistake her silence for weakness. Now I know that some people grow quieter the more they hurt, and the more they are pushed, the more they hold on to their last bit of dignity. Mrs. Fuang suddenly jumped up, rushed to my mother's altar, and wailed loudly. "Matt, look at your son. He listens to his wife, listens to outsiders, and turns to attack his own aunt. I only cared about him, fearing the family's property would fall into that woman's hands, yet he treats me like this." I look at her, for the first time feeling no fear of what they call blood relations. I walk over, standing before my mother's altar, blocking her from the portrait. "Don't you dare say my mother's name again. When my mother was alive, how many times did you even visit? My mother lay in pain, curled up in bed. Did you ever even bring her a single bowl of porridge? When she passed, you shed few tears but asked about the property deeds constantly." Aunt Fuang gapes, and a few neighbors standing by the door begin to whisper. An older neighbor speaks quietly, but loud enough to be heard. "That's right, when she was sick, it was always Thou taking her to the hospital, never her sister." That statement lands like a slap to Aunt Fuang's face. She stumbles and turns to me, lowering her voice. "Quan, I'm only looking out for you. This house belongs to your mother, surely you wouldn't let Thou Hong have it?" Thou finally speaks up, her voice not loud but very clear. "I have never asked for this house. I have never taken a penny from her, yet you all use my name to cover your own greed." As the atmosphere settles, Tan suddenly bolts for the back door. He is so fast that no one can react, but in his panic, he slams into a wooden shelf. His briefcase falls, the latch pops, and a stack of papers scatters across the floor. I bend down to pick them up. Among them is a house sale contract with all the information already filled out. The buyer's name is no stranger, but a relative of Aunt Fuang's side. The price is nearly half the house's actual value, and beneath it is a power of attorney form. My signature section is left blank, just waiting for a pen. I hold the paper up and look at Aunt Fuang. "You said you were looking out for me, then what is this?" Aunt Fuang can no longer speak. As for Tuit, his face drains of all color. The creditors immediately block the door so Tan cannot escape. One man grabs his collar and growls, "You thought you could trick a drunk and be done with it? Explain everything to everyone today." Tan struggled, still denying it. "Let go, you have no right to hold me." I stood watching him, waves of anger surging within me. If I just stepped forward, just one punch, perhaps all the resentment in my heart would be released. But then I looked at Thou. She was watching me, her gaze calm yet guarded, as if wanting to see what I would choose this time. I unclenched my tightly gripped fists. I said to Tan, I was stupid to trust you, but today I'm not stupid enough to let my hands get stained with a crime because of you. Then I turned to Ms. Han, please call the authorities to come and handle this. I will provide all the documents, videos, and messages. Tan looked at me, and for the first time, there was genuine fear in his eyes, while I stood in the middle of the chaotic room, feeling no lighter, but very clear-headed. I knew this night was not just about exposing Tan, Tuat, or Ms. Fuang. It was also the first time I pulled myself out from the shadow of a man who only knew how to use his fists to hide his powerlessness. About half an hour later, local officials arrived, and the atmosphere in the house was completely different from before. Not long ago, Ms. Fuang was still standing in front of my mother's altar, wailing. Tuat was still holding his phone recording, and Tan was still patting my shoulder like he was doing me a favor. Yet now, all three of them had their heads hung low. The documents scattered on the floor, the recordings on the computer, the messages in the phone. They were all like locks tightening around the necks of those who thought they could use my weakness to harm Thou. I stepped aside, watching Thou quietly pick up my mother's wooden box and place it neatly back on the altar. She gently wiped the dust from the lid, her movements very soft, as if afraid of hurting a keepsake. From beginning to end, Thou never scolded anyone. She didn't gloat when watching Tan being held, didn't sneer at Tuat, nor did she utter any bitter words to Ms. Fuang. That very calmness made me feel small. The victim still maintained her dignity, while I had previously turned into a beast in my own home over just a few disagreeable words. After failing to talk her way out of it, Ms. Fuang suddenly changed her tone. She stepped closer to Thou, her voice trembling quite convincingly. Thou, I am Quan's aunt after all. I was just too hot-headed earlier and spoke wrongly. Please forgive me this once. If family matters are taken outside, it will bring shame upon the whole clan. Thou turned to look at her, her gaze calm, but with a decisiveness I had never seen before. She asked, when you accused me of stealing, did you think of me as family? Ms. Fuang was left speechless. Thou continued, slowly enunciating every word. When you let Tuat edit that clip and post it for the neighbors to gossip about. Did you think about my reputation at all? Did you think about how I would go on living with the label of a mother-in-law's money thief if I were a little weaker? No one in the room could say a single word. Tuat stood behind his mother, his face turning pale, yet he still tried to justify himself. I just recorded the incident. I didn't know it would be this serious. I just did what the adults told me to do. Ms. Han immediately stepped forward, her voice cold as ice. Even if adults are wrong, you still have the right not to go along with it. You are not a 3-year-old. You knew how to record, post, and write a caption to incite people to bash Thou. And now you claim you didn't know? Tuat bowed his head. But I knew it wasn't out of remorse, but fear. Fear that the evidence would drag him into trouble. Fear that the phone, which was once a tool to smear others, was now turning into evidence against himself. I looked at Thou. Ever since everything came to light, I had wanted to say something for her, wanted to step up and declare we would handle this to the end, wanted to shut down those fake pleas, but I stopped myself in time. This is Thou's grievance, Thou's honor. I have no right to decide for her whether to forgive or to make a big deal out of it. For years, I have done too much for her. Endured in silence for her, swallowed tears for her, and shouldered the consequences for her. This time, I must learn to stand by her side rather than taking control of her life again. Thou took a deep breath and spoke to the person recording the incident. I demand that the slander about me taking the money be cleared up. I have full clips, messages, posts, and witnesses. I don't want to play dirty for revenge, but I need a public apology. I need that post taken down and everything clearly documented. I don't want people pointing fingers at me wherever I go from now on. The person nodded and made a note of it. Thou turned to Tan, looking at him for a long time for the first time. As for you, Tan, deceiving my husband is between you and the law, but you dragged me into this, used my name to fabricate stories, and used my silence to force Quan to sell the house. That is something I will not overlook. Tan hurriedly spoke up. Thou, you and I have no grudge against each other. This is men's business, don't get involved. If I've wronged Quan, I'll talk to Quan. Thou smiled slightly, but there was no softness left in that smile. When you blamed me, did you consider that men's business? Tan fell silent. I stepped forward and placed all the copies of documents, bank statements, messages, and the video my mother left behind into a file folder. Any debt I truly owe, I will repay. I am not running away, but for the parts where Tan committed fraud, forged documents, and colluded to force me to sell the house, I demand they be clarified. A creditor standing nearby growled, I will also file a report. It's not just Quan. Many others transferred money to him and lost everything. Tan showed clear signs of panic. He no longer had that dapper, confident look he had when he entered the house. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his eyes constantly darting around looking for an exit. But there were people at the front door, creditors blocking the back door, and on the table were the documents he couldn't swallow back. Aunt Phuong started crying again, but this time her sobbing was quieter, more pathetic, lacking the overbearing tone from before. She grabbed my hand. Quan, after all, I am your mother's younger sister. How can you bear to let them file a report against me? If your mother came back to life, she surely wouldn't want siblings to end up like this. I looked at her hand clutching my shirt and gently pulled it away. If my mother were still alive, the first thing she would do is apologize to thou for letting her suffer injustice in this house. Please, stop using my mother to cover up your own faults. After saying that, my heart ached. After all, she is my own aunt. Blood is not easily severed, but it cannot be an excuse to do immoral things and force the victim to stay silent. I understood that if I softened my heart today because of our family ties, thou would once again be sacrificed for the sake of so-called family honor. Thou looked at me, a brief flash of surprise in her eyes, but it quickly returned to calmness. She said to me, Quan, your debts you must pay. Tan's faults, Tan must bear. The faults of Aunt Phuong and Tuat, they must also bear themselves. Don't try to atone for me by pushing all the blame onto others. Justice is not about choosing one person to dump everything on. Quote, I nodded. That statement made me ashamed, but it also brought me to my senses. Thou didn't protect me blindly, nor did she use this chance to corner everyone else out of spite. She only wanted everything in its proper place. Whoever was wrong should bear their own consequences. That is kindness with boundaries, not the weak-willed resignation of the past. I turned to everyone and bowed my head. I am also at fault. I used to drink, I used to hit my wife, and I let others take advantage of my ignorance and temper to hurt her. I will take responsibility for what I have done. If thou wants a divorce, I will not contest it. If she needs me to provide compensation or sign any papers to protect her, I will sign them. Thou did not answer immediately after hearing this. She just looked at me for a long time and said, if you want to start over, first learn to be a decent person when I'm not around. The words were soft, but to me, they felt as heavy as a verdict, because I knew thou was not yet back, and she wouldn't forget everything just because I stood up for her for one night. After finishing the matters, Han took thou's arm and they left the house. Before leaving, thou turned to look at my mother's altar, bowed slightly, and then stepped out the door. I stood in the middle of the chaotic house, watching her figure fade behind the gate. This time I didn't run after her, didn't beg, didn't hold on. I just quietly bent down to pick up the papers scattered on the floor, starting to clean up the aftermath of a storm that should have arrived long ago. After that night, things were no longer contained within the walls of a single house. Videos, documents, messages, and testimonies from those who had invested with Tan were gathered together. I was the first to sign the statement, clearly detailing how Tan had lured me into investing, how I transferred the money, and how I mortgaged the house while not thinking clearly. Writing those lines, my hand felt as heavy as if it were weighed down by stones, because even though Tan's deception was real, my own stupidity, rashness, and greedy desire to recoup were also real. I no longer wanted to paint myself as a complete victim. In just a few days, several others came forward. Some were market vendors, some were office workers, and some were even old friends of Tan. They had all heard him paint pictures of lucrative profits, and all had transferred money only to lose everything. An older person holding a stack of loan papers spoke to me, trembling. I thought I was the only one he had deceived, so I was too ashamed to speak up. Who would have thought he had harmed so many people? Hearing that, I understood even more that if Mom hadn't left the memory card, and if I had signed the house sale that night, Tan would have had another trophy built on someone else's pain. Tan was summoned for questioning. At first, he was still evasive, saying it was all just business losses, not fraud. But the forged power of attorney, the pre-filled house sale contract, the messages promising profits, and the recording of him talking with Tuit made it impossible for him to deny it for long. Authorities also discovered his accounts had numerous transactions routed through the names of his relatives. His dapper, confident facade vanished very quickly. He started blaming Tuit, claiming he only heard from Tuit that my house was for sale and helped introduce a buyer. Tuit didn't escape either. The clip he posted on the neighborhood network was ordered to be taken down. He had to write a statement regarding his editing and posting of unverified information, which damaged Thou's reputation. At first, Tuit was still stubborn, claiming he only shared it for others to know, but when Han showed the video of him trying to delete the evidence, he went silent. In the end, he had to publicly apologize to Thou in the neighborhood group, the family group, and before everyone who witnessed that night. I read Tuit's apology without feeling any sense of triumph. Because in those forced words, I only saw the cowardice of someone backed into a corner, not necessarily truly remorseful. But I also understand that life doesn't always force bad people to kneel and weep for it to be called paying the price. Sometimes, the greatest price is losing the trust of everyone around you. After that incident, no one among them dared to listen to Tuit like before. Those who had joined in to mock Thou also quietly deleted their messages. Some even asked me to pass on their apologies to her. Miss Fuang, meanwhile, was clearly losing her standing. She wasn't driven to a dead end immediately, but the reputation she had upheld for years collapsed overnight. The relatives who used to hear her bad-mouth Thou started asking back, "So, what about the medical expenses anyway? Who contributed? How much was given?" Ms. Fuang couldn't answer. The sums she had received under the guise of helping Ms. Man were also brought back into question. She had to return a portion of the money she took wrongfully, and the house she had been eyeing was now out of her reach. From then on, whenever there was a family gathering, she arrived very quietly, no longer using that preachy tone from before. For my part, after it all, I don't feel like I won. I only feel a chill down my spine. If not for Mom silently recording things, if not for Thou enduring until the very end and still keeping those letters, if Han hadn't stood by her side, perhaps I would have sold the house, lost all the evidence, and dragged Thou through the mud once again. I used to think the most terrifying person in my life was Tan, but then I realized, even more terrifying was myself when I was ignorant, drunk, and unable to distinguish who was truly sincere with me. I started working again, no longer a boss, no more private shop, and certainly nothing left to show off to my relatives. I applied to be a warehouse manager at a small workshop on the edge of town. The job isn't fancy, the pay isn't high, but every cent I earn is clean. The first day I wore the blue uniform. Looking at myself in the mirror, I felt a pang of sorrow. There was a time I considered such work menial, a failure. Now I understand, failure isn't working for someone else, failure is not living like a human being. I signed up for alcohol rehabilitation at a small clinic. Sitting before the doctor for the first time, I was so ashamed I couldn't even look up. I told him I used to drink too much, lose control, and beat my wife. The doctor didn't scold me, he just asked, "Who are you quitting for?" I was silent for a long time, then replied, "I used to think for my wife, but now I want to quit because if I don't, I won't be a human anymore." The doctor nodded and handed me a notebook to track every day I stayed sober. The first days were miserable, my hands shook, I felt restless, and lying in bed listening to the rain, I craved a drink like crazy. There were times I stood in front of a grocery store, staring at bottles on the shelf, my throat dry and bitter. But then I remembered Thou's face in the prayer room. Remembering my mother's words, atoning isn't about forcing others to forgive, but living decently even when no one is watching. I turned away to buy a bottle of water and went home. Every month, I send Thou a copy of the payments I've made toward my debt. I don't make excuses, I don't brag, I just write briefly. I have paid off this much, I am still working. I am not drinking. Sometimes Thou doesn't reply, sometimes she just texts one word, "Okay." That one word is enough to make me feel I must keep going, not because I hope she returns immediately, but because for the first time, I know how to be responsible for my own words. One day, I went on my own to see the doctor who had treated Thou. I asked to look back at the records of her injuries, not to keep them, but to remember. The doctor looked at me for a long time and said, "Some bruises fade in a few weeks, but fear stays for much longer." That stayed with me the entire way home. I understand, I cannot expect Thou to trust me again just because I've changed for a few months. Every night, I light incense for my mother. I keep the altar room cleaned and tidy. There are no more bottles of alcohol in the house. I replace the broken items, but I kept the scratches on the floor tiles to remind myself never to forget how much this house once suffered. 3 months later, one afternoon, my phone lit up. It was Thou. I stared at the screen for a long time before daring to answer. On the other end, her voice was calm, no longer as cold as before. "Tomorrow is Mom's 100th-day memorial. I will come to light some incense." I stood in the middle of the warehouse, my eyes stinging, at just that one sentence. But to me, that wasn't a forgiveness, it was a door opening just a tiny crack. And I knew, if I wanted to step through that door, I had to continue living a decent life, one day at a time. I am not allowed to return to my old ways again. The night I received Thou's call, I barely slept. Not because I was happy enough to delude myself that she would return, but because I was afraid of clumsily ruining the tiny opportunity she had just given me. I cleaned the house from evening until late, swept the yard, changed the water in the vases on Mom's altar, and washed the old tablecloth. There were things Thou used to do every day that I had never even noticed. Now that I do them myself, I realize a clean house doesn't just happen on its own. It is maintained by the patience of a woman who silently carried both the work and the pain for this family. The next morning, I woke up very early. The meal for Mom's 100th-day memorial wasn't large, nor did I invite relatives to make a fuss. I only made the dishes Mom liked when she was alive: a small pot of braised fish, a bowl of light vegetable soup, a plate of golden fried eggs, and a cup of hot tea placed next to her portrait. I don't cook as skillfully as Thou. The fish was a bit salty, the eggs a bit charred. But it was the first time I had prepared a meal for Mom with my own hands while fully sober. Nearly 10 o'clock, Thou arrived, and with her was Ms. Han. I opened the door and saw Thou wearing a light blue shirt, her hair tied neatly behind her neck. She is thinner than before, but her eyes no longer hold the fear they did when she lived in this house. She stood before the gate for a few seconds, looking into the familiar yard. Then she stepped inside. I stepped aside and said softly, "Thank you for coming to offer incense for my mother." Thou nodded without replying. Han looked me up and down, still maintaining a guarded expression. I understood, she didn't hate me without reason. Someone who has witnessed their friend being hurt cannot easily trust a few months of change from the person who caused that pain. I didn't feel uncomfortable. On the contrary, I felt grateful that during the time I was at my worst, Thou still had someone strong enough to stand by her side. Thou went up to the altar room. The room had been wiped clean. My mother's letters were still neatly placed in the wooden box. She lit 3 incense sticks and stood before my mother's portrait for a long time. Her voice was so soft that if I hadn't been standing close, I probably wouldn't have heard it. "Mom, I have kept your words, but from now on I must also take care of myself. Please don't be sad." That sentence made my throat choke up. I understood, she still loved my mother. I also understood that love did not mean she had to come back and endure me. Thou placed the incense in the burner, hands clasped before her chest, eyes red but not crying. I stood behind her, head bowed like a child belatedly learning how to repent. The meal took place in silence. I invited Thou and Han to sit but didn't try to create a fake atmosphere of intimacy. We ate very little. Thou picked up a piece of braised fish, paused, and spoke softly. Mom liked the braised fish a bit saltier. I smiled sadly. I overdid the seasoning. For the first time in months, the corners of Thou's lips moved slightly. Not quite a smile, but no longer icy either. After the meal, I took a stack of papers from the cabinet and placed them on the table. Thou looked at me, her gaze immediately becoming wary. I hurriedly said, "It's not property papers, nor is it anything for you to sign." I pushed the stack of papers toward her. "These are the confirmations that I am undergoing alcohol treatment, counseling appointments, and a monthly debt repayment plan. And this is a commitment I wrote in advance. If I ever commit domestic violence again, I will leave the house voluntarily, agree to divorce, not dispute anything, and not make things difficult for you." Thou stared at the papers for a long time. Han picked them up to read first, her face showing some surprise, but she remained silent. Thou asked me, "Are you doing all of this to get me back, or because you truly want to change?" That question left me silent. If it were me a few months ago, I probably would have rushed to say it was to get you back, so things could be like they were before. But now I know that, like before, for Thou isn't happiness, but a period of life full of fear. I replied very slowly, "At first, I did it because I wanted you back. I won't hide that. But as time went on, I realized if I only changed to keep you, then one day when you were no longer by my side, I would revert to my old self. Now I'm doing this because I don't want to live like a coward anymore. Even if you don't return, I still have to change. Thou bowed her head, and tears fell onto the edge of the paper. That was the first time she had cried in front of me since the day she left the house. But I didn't dare reach out to wipe her tears. I just sat still, keeping a distance far enough for her to feel safe. Han exhaled softly and said, "If you can keep this up for a while longer, at least you deserve to be reconsidered. But remember, trust isn't something you can just ask for. You have to earn it back, bit by bit." I nodded. "Do you understand?" "Understand what?" At that moment, I suddenly remembered something. I stood up, went into Mom's room, and took out an old cloth bag containing a light brown sweater with one sleeve half knitted. I placed it in front of Thou. "Mom knitted this for you before she passed away. She told me that if I had time, I should learn to finish it. But I was clumsy and messed it up a few times. I still kept it because I didn't dare throw it away." Thou touched the sweater, and tears streamed down again. She stroked each uneven stitch, her voice choking. "Mom always thought of me." I said softly, "Yes, and it took me too long to learn how to think of others." I desperately wanted to hug her, to say I missed her, I needed her, and I couldn't live without her. But in the end, I just sat still, because I understand that if love doesn't know how to keep its boundaries, it easily turns into selfishness. Quote, I looked at Thou and spoke with all the composure I could muster. "I don't dare ask for your forgiveness today. I only ask that you don't hate yourself for having once loved me. The one at fault is me, not you." Thou clutched the sweater to her chest, silent for a long time. When she stood up to leave, she didn't say she would come back to live with me. She didn't promise anything either. But before stepping out the door, she stopped, turned to look at my mother's altar, and whispered, "I'll come by next week to light incense for her." The door closed behind her and Han. I stood in the quiet house, my hands still shaking, but this time my heart was no longer filled with despair. I know Thou hasn't forgiven me, and I know I'm not yet worthy of having her back, but a very small path has appeared, and my job is to walk it with kindness, slowly, without ever losing my way again. Thou kept her word. The following week, she returned to light incense for my mother. Then, the week after that, she came again. At first, she only stayed for a few minutes, placed white flowers on the altar, changed the water, sat quietly for a moment, and then left. I didn't ask if she wanted to eat, and I didn't dare keep her long. I just stood at a distance, far enough so she knew this house was no longer a place she had to fear. Time passed, and Tan was eventually dealt with for fraud, document forgery, and stealing money from many people. Those he had harmed came forward to testify. He had to pay compensation, apologize publicly, and remove all the defamatory posts about Thou. Aunt Fuang was no longer as loud-mouthed in the family as before. She returned the money she had wrongly taken and lived more quietly. I felt no joy watching them pay the price. I only saw one thing clearly. Whatever people sow, they will sooner or later reap, and they cannot hide forever. For my part, I am also paying the price. I lost my dignity, lost my old friends, and lost the arrogance that once clung to my heart. But perhaps losing those things was necessary for me to learn how to live a decent life. My creditors agreed to let me pay in installments, month by month, as I receive my salary. The first thing I do is set aside a portion for debt, a portion for my mother's incense, and live frugally on the rest. I still record every sober day in my small notebook. On tiring days, the old me wants to resurface. I just go to the altar room, read my mother's letter, and remind myself not to let a moment of weakness ruin the progress I've made. Thou didn't return right away. She and Han opened a small sewing class. I heard from acquaintances that she is very patient. Most of her students are women who haven't worked in a long time, some looking for extra income, others wanting a skill to stand on their own. Hearing that, my heart felt both happy and stung. I used to think I was the one protecting Thou, but now I realize she was always capable of standing up. She just stayed low for so long out of love for me. Every time Thou visits, the kitchen feels a little warmer. At first, she would just have a glass of water and leave. Later, there were days she stayed for a simple meal. I don't dare cook anything fancy, just boiled vegetables, braised fish, and a bowl of hot soup. Once, Thou looked at the meal and whispered, "You've stopped making it so salty." I chuckled, but my eyes stung. It was just a small remark, yet to me, it felt like soft sunlight after many days of rain. One late afternoon at the end of the year, it drizzled just like the night everything started to change. Thou stood in the kitchen looking at the calendar on the wall. On it, I had marked every day I didn't drink. She was silent for a long time before asking, "Are you still afraid of failure?" I set my tea down, thought for a moment, and said honestly, "I'm still afraid of debt, of being looked down upon, of one day failing to achieve anything worthwhile, but now, I'm most afraid of hurting those who love me." Thou turned to look at me. There was no longer the fear from before in her eyes, though it wasn't quite full trust yet either. It was a slow, cautious look, but with something softer in it. She said, "I won't promise to go back to how things were, because that was too painful. If we start, we must start like two new people." I lowered my head, tears falling onto the back of my hand. This time, I didn't cry to hold her back, nor did I cry hoping for immediate forgiveness. I cried because I finally understood that being given a chance isn't about erasing past sins, but being allowed to live more decently each day. That evening, Thou and I went up to the altar room to light incense for Mom. Incense smoke drifted softly through the quiet room. The old wooden box was still there, holding the letters that had saved me from my darkest days. I looked at Mom's portrait and whispered, "Mom, I'm still not perfect, but I am trying. I will keep trying for the rest of my life." Thou stood beside me, her hands clasped, speaking softly, "Rest assured, Mom, I will live better too, and never lose myself for anyone else again." The house wasn't bustling then, and there were no grand promises, just two people who had once strayed very far, learning how to draw closer with calmness and respect. I don't know if Thou will truly return to be my wife as before, but I know that if she does, I must love her differently, more kindly, more slowly, and never let my pain become her wound again. There are mistakes that cannot be forgotten, and wounds that leave scars even after they heal, but there are also people. Only after going through the storm do you realize how precious peace truly is. I once lost almost everything because of my own weakness and temper. Fortunately, my mother, Thou, and those silent letters pulled me back before it was too late. If anyone asked me what remains in the end, I would say it is not the house, not the honor, and not the money. What remains is a cup of hot tea on the table, an incense stick before Mom's portrait, and the woman I once hurt, still generous enough to tell me that if we start over, let us start as two new people. To me, that alone is the most beautiful, late-blooming spring of my life.